Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mohamed ElBaradel, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Commission here to Yale. And we'll be talking about the state of non-proliferation efforts around the world today. Dr. Baradei, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you very much for having me, Jonathan.
Well, let me begin by going back in history a little bit. As you know very well, back in 1953, President Eisenhower proposed the Atoms for Peace program, and later something like this was incorporated into the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, really committing the nuclear powers to share nuclear power technology, including the fuel cycle and lock, stock, and barrel to other countries around the world. And recently, this, of course, has been a problem. Do you think they made a mistake back in 1953 and 1970, and should some corrective action be taken?
I don't think, Jonathan, they made a mistake. I think the basic assumption of Atoms for Peace is still quite valid, that we need nuclear technology to use for peaceful application, generating electricity, using nuclear techniques for curing disease, improving productivity of food, managing groundwater, etc. There are lots of beneficial, uses of nuclear energy, but nuclear energy, like any other technology, has its dark side. And the whole Atom for Peace was based on this assumption that let us maximize the benefit of nuclear energy, let us minimize the risk. And that assumption is still valid today. The difference, of course, that technology has evolved. We now know how the more application we can use nuclear energy for, but we also know how you can really misuse nuclear energy in many different ways that were not known to us before. So what is needed is an absolutely adjusting the concept to the current day reality.
Mm-hmm. But where would you draw the line? In other words, the nuclear powers are permitted to have everything, nuclear weapons, nuclear power, fuse cycle, the whole shooting match, so to speak. But the non-nuclear weapon powers are also permitted at present to have the fuel cycle, but this seems to be something of a Trojan horse within the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I'm wondering if the adjustment would come in this area and what it perhaps should be.
I think you're right that the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970, tried to make the appropriate adjustment at the time, by basically saying, let us build on the Atoms for Peace. The Atoms for Peace was not very specific on the commitment not to have nuclear weapons, although it was meant that to discourage the development of nuclear weapons, but there was not the necessary mechanism. The NPT decided then to have a clear-cut legal commitment. Everybody who did not have nuclear weapons by 1970 or 67, in fact, should not make a commitment not to have nuclear weapon. And the 5 recognized nuclear weapon states at that time made a commitment to move toward nuclear disarmament. So the basic legal commitment, the proper legal commitment, were made in 1970. What happened, of course, is a number of events which led us to where we are today. The first, of course, that there is a sense of collective insecurity is even more, than I think what we had during the Cold War. The Cold War, there was 2 blocks, but there was a clear delimitation line, and the concept of nuclear deterrence was clearly defined. Each one of the 2 blocks have their own states to protect. That system has disappeared, and we talked about that we were euphoric at that time about a new world order. Unfortunately, we did not develop that world order. So we have this vacuum, and where you still have like 30 countries relying on nuclear umbrella under the Nato and different bilateral arrangements, the rest of the countries in the world feel that they are left in the cold, that they don't have this ultimate deterrence.
By the way, does anybody else, other than NATO, hold out a nuclear umbrella? I was just trying to think as you speak.
Well, I think Japan, which is not a member of NATO, has a nuclear.
No, of course, but I mean, is there any extender of a nuclear umbrella other than the United States and NATO? Does Russia offer its?
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah,
I think
or
it's
China.
I'm not aware of that.
No.
I think it's primarily the NATO umbrella, and the U.S. bilateral with like South Korea.
Only the West has extended deterrence in this way.
Deterrence, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So you have like around 30 countries, to Australia, to New Zealand, and some in addition to NATO, and then you have the rest of the world who feel, wait a minute, these people have this ultimate deterrence, the nuclear umbrella, and we are left in the cold. So this is create in certain regions, like the Middle East, like South Asia, like the Korean Peninsula, a sense of insecurity. And of course, add to that is the war of words. I mean, we have seen, the regime being described in different, names that we have seen. President
Rogue state and so forth.
Exactly, and President Najad, talking about, Israel in a negative way. So all this rhetoric added to the sense of insecurity in the world. Then the second factor that we have now, a technology that is out of the tube, that we, at the beginning, or 20, 30 years ago, the technology was limited to the highly industrialized countries. They were regarded as the ones who can have the technology to develop nuclear weapons, to develop enrichment technology, reprocessing technology, to weaponize. Well, in the last 10 years or so, we have seen that there has been an underground black market in nuclear technology, and we have realized that countries with a average industrial infrastructure can develop nuclear weapons. So that's another important factor, that we could not just rely on export control.
Right.
This export control may be still important, but not crucial.
Right.
Then we have, again, a new phenomenon, which is, as you called it, the Trojan horse, that many countries have come to realize that they don't need to develop, nuclear weapon, lock, stock, and barrel. It's enough to develop the capability, to enrich uranium or to reprocess plutonium, because this is the key component in developing nuclear weapons, and they know that if they have that capability, that's already enough deterrence.
Well, should the NPT then seek to stop, you've used the good phrase, virtual nuclear weapon states to describe those who have the near capacity to make them but don't actually go ahead and do it. Yeah. Should one of the goals of the NPT be to prevent the development of virtual weapon states as well as nuclear weapon states?
I think so. I mean, the net effect is pretty much the same. I mean, whether you have nuclear weapon today or whether you can have nuclear weapon in a matter of weeks, to me, the net effect is the same. You will have proliferation of either nuclear weapon or weapon capable states.
But isn't there a problem, though, if you seek to restrict the fuel cycle to prevent certain countries from getting it while others, especially the nuclear powers, have it? Isn't there a problem of deepening the double standard, which seems to undermine the whole NPT?
Sure. Jonathan, you cannot have it into those who will keep that technology and those who are told not to have the technology. We have seen the same haves and have-nots under the NPT. The fact that the nuclear weapon states have been sluggish on their fulfilling their commitment to move toward nuclear disarmament has resulted in many countries saying, well, this haves and have-nots is not sustainable. Let us try to emulate, the weapon state. The same is going to happen in the enrichment, unless you have an equitable system where everybody agree that enrichment or reprocessing is under international, multinational, regional control.
Do you think that the nuclear weapon states would be prepared to surrender their own national means to an international authority? That's an idea, as you, I'm sure, are much aware, that was first introduced by the Acheson-Lilienthal plan way back in 1946.
Sure.
And when you have been proposing this, I've often thought of that plan. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think they have to make a fundamental choice. Either they are ready to accept a principle of equity, that the international community today will not accept a system based on let's have the cake and eat it,
Right.
or accept or resign themselves to the fact that in the next 10, 20 years we'll have another 10, 20 nuclear weapon capable states. And to me, if we end up by not having 9 nuclear weapon states, but having 30 nuclear weapon states, well, we are fulfilling, unfortunately, President Kennedy's prophecy, and that would be, to me, the beginning of the end. The more you have nuclear weapons states, the more the probability that nuclear weapons will be used either intentionally or through error or mistake.
You've been very forceful in saying that the nuclear weapon powers should fulfill their part of the NPT bargain by stepping up nuclear disarmament. I'm wondering whether you think there could be any specific mechanism that would link the non-proliferation effort to the nuclear disarmament effort. Of course, in the NPT, Article 6 makes that bargain and that commitment is made, but there's no mechanism, there's no forum, there's no negotiation, there's no world body that connects the two issues and creates the quid pro quos and so forth.
Well, I think you are absolutely correct. I mean, the NPT provides the framework, the umbrella, if you like, but we don't have yet a detailed mechanism to link progress on non-proliferation and progress on disarmament. I mean, you can have that clearly as part of the Non-Proliferation Review Conference, which meets every 5 years to review the implementation of the treaty, by agreeing on a roadmap for disarmament. You can have that through the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, which has been in, almost on a holiday for the last 10 years since they have completed the Chemical Weapon Convention and the Comprehensive Test Ban Convention. So one can easily find a mechanism. The important thing is, are the weapon states ready to bite the bullet, agree that they really need to take concrete steps toward nuclear disarmament? I can't, for the life of me, understand that why we still live today with 27,000 warheads in existence. Why we still do not have a comprehensive test ban treaty in force after 10 years, of concluding that treaty. And then, of course, now, we are crying, and the international community is crying about North Korea's testing. But if testing is such an important issue as it is, we should have make clear that this testing, is legally banned.
Why do you think, by the way, at the end of the Second World War, there was an effort actually to abolish nuclear weapons? That was the Baruch Plan, and the Soviets made their own proposal. Of course, it went nowhere. Why do you think there was no comparable effort, successful or otherwise, at the end of the Cold War? Why do you think that there was so little done in the nuclear disarmament area? I know there were reductions and so forth, but nothing as bold as the Atchison-Lilienthal plan or the Baruch plan.
Correct. I need to give the dues to the weapon states. They moved from, I think during the Cold War, the highest of the Cold War, we had 65,000 warheads, but we moved to 27,000. But to me, again, this is 27,000 too many. Why we have not moved boldly into nuclear disarmament? I think a number of factors. Inertia. We are used to nuclear deterrence. It worked, so maybe we keep doing what we have been doing. Although now all the writing on the wall that it cannot continue, because deterrence was already during the Cold War. Nuclear deterrence might not work with plethora of new nuclear weapon states. And I should add nuclear terrorism. That phenomenon, the idea that a sophisticated group of terrorists will acquire nuclear weapons, the whole concept of deterrence does not figure, because these people will not respond to any deterrence. If they have nuclear weapon, they will use it. I think it's also, frankly, intellectual laziness, if I say that we continue to talk about nuclear disarmament, but we haven't really done much to develop an alternative system of security that does not depend on nuclear deterrence.
Yes, there seems to be a paradox that the last two people to very seriously talk about eliminating nuclear weapons were Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in the Reykjavik. It made me wonder whether the Cold War wasn't a better context for these ideas than the post-Cold War period, which would be very paradoxical.
It is very paradoxical that after the end of the Cold War, when everybody thinks that the raison d'etre for nuclear weapons should not be there, that we still have the nuclear weapons of both Russia and the US, aimed at each other on what Sam Nunn called it a hair trigger alert, or a Cold War status alert, that each leader of these two countries will only have half an hour to decide whether to respond to a nuclear attack. or a reported nuclear attack. This could be the result of a computer error, misinformation, what have you. Are we ready to, risk the, absolute annihilation of at least a good part of our civilization? Because, and at the end of the day, we say, "Oops, we made a mistake." I mean, it's to me unconscionable.
Yeah. I noticed that, of course, Pakistan and India have acquired nuclear weapons, and recently the United States has made a deal on nuclear power with India. And in that context, the Indian Prime Minister Singh said that India was joining what he called a nuclear world order, a new nuclear world order. And it almost seemed that he had an idea of organizing the world around the presence of nuclear weapons rather than their disappearance, even though India over the years has favored nuclear disarmament. I wonder if you could comment on that.
I think the Indian change of attitude, if you like, is a very good indication of the change of attitude toward nuclear disarmament. India, you're right. India, Nehru, Prime Minister Nehru was one of the very first who called about general and complete disarmament, nuclear disarmament. And India, for years did not, want to move into being a nuclear weapon state. They have come to a point, I think, at a point in time when they have realized, well, we are 1 billion people. We are having nuclear weapon states around us, and we don't see the nuclear weapon states moving toward nuclear disarmament. So until they do that, we probably have to join them. It is regrettable that happened, but that, to my mind, was the reading by India, and of course joined later on by Pakistan, of the environment. The environment, as you rightly said, Jonathan, is based on nuclear weapon and nuclear weapon deterrence, and doesn't look that is going to change anytime soon.
But as the guardian of the NPT, if I may describe you that way, aren't you worried that this acceptance of the Indian move towards the bomb by the United States and maybe the international community might tend to weaken the NPT?
I don't think so, frankly, because India never made a commitment to join the NPT, so they haven't really violated any legal obligation. Neither was Pakistan, neither was Israel, for that matter. I think the weapons accepting India, as a nuclear weapon, is difficult for the weapon state to say, we will not accept you, as a nuclear weapon, while they continue themselves to hold on to nuclear weapon, and not only that, but trying to develop weapons that are usable. The other issue is that whether accepting India or not, it is a reality. And I've raised the question a number of times. If there were to be a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, are we going to say this is not a nuclear war because we don't recognize them? It is a reality, and being, as you said, a custodian of the regime, but also being a pragmatist, I thought it is important that to bring India on board and bring Pakistan on board and bring Israel on board, and hopefully get all these countries who hold nuclear weapon or nuclear weapon capability to work together toward nuclear disarmament. India and Pakistan are facts on the ground. We cannot say we don't see them as the best approach to me is to say, all right, they are there. Let us bring them closer to the regime, and let us work with them to move toward nuclear disarmament.
Let me change this subject a little bit. Of course, before the Iraq War, your agency and also Hans Blix were saying they couldn't find much evidence of a nuclear program, no evidence in Iraq. But let me ask you this. Were you at all surprised when, at the end of the war, it turned out that there literally was no such program in Iraq? Was there any element of surprise in your reaction, or did it merely confirm what you had believed previously? We hear that every intelligence agency in the world believed that they did have the programs and so forth, and yet your agency and Hans Blix were saying otherwise. So I just wonder if there was any element of surprise in your reaction.
I don't think there was any surprise, Jonathan. We have been in Iraq for, from 91 to 97, when we know that we dismantled, destroyed all Iraq nuclear weapon capability. Then we went back in 2002, and we haven't seen any indication of a revival of the nuclear weapon program. Our people are the most seasoned, experienced inspectors who have a lot of experience with Iraq, and all the reports I was getting we don't see any smoking gun anywhere. And that's what I was reporting to the Security Council. In fact, I remember, I think in January of 2003, couple of months before the war, I said I need 3 months to complete my job, and I said these 3 months will be investment in peace. So I was not surprised, but I should say I was unfortunately relieved that we were right, but that relief was coupled with a lot of grief that we ended up losing a lot of innocent lives in that war, as that was launched on the basis of a false assumption, and that Iraq is developing a weapon of mass destruction.
Let me ask, I mean, you're really somebody who's in the engine room of the non-proliferation effort, so to speak. And of course, you act by peaceful means, by diplomacy, inspection, through the treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Do you think that there's any role, we've just been speaking of the Iraq War, for military action in a non-proliferation effort?
It's of course difficult to say, to give a sweeping response, no. But in general, I would say I don't find use of force at all to be a solution to any of the non-proliferation issues. These are very complex issues that has to do with a sense of isolation, a sense of insecurity, a sense of a feeling that the regime survival is at stake. And if I take Iran, for example, which is a current issue, I see absolutely no military solution. It would be completely counterproductive. I don't see a military solution for North Korea. It would be completely counterproductive. I still believe, we need to go beyond.
When you say counterproductive, what do you mean?
Well, what I mean that if you use force, for example, if I use force in Iraq, there are no military nuclear facilities to be bombed, and I know if you use force at all, it would be a rallying point for all the Iranians, to go for an accelerated program for a nuclear weapon. We have not come to a firm conclusion that this is a weapon program. We're still saying the jury is out. So it will be counterproductive that even if they are not working for a nuclear weapon program, any use of force will completely, put the hardliner in the driver force, put the national pride, into the front seat, and lead to an acceleration of a weapon program. We have seen some of that in a way, in North Korea. The more you try to isolate the country, the more you try to put pressure, alone without using engagement, the more a country will feel tempted to develop nuclear weapons. So I don't really see that. I still believe, maybe I'm very traditionalist, but I still believe that diplomacy, engagement, understanding where people are coming from, providing them a sense of security, that's a basic thing. You need to engage them, but you need also to assure them that either the regime is not threatened, that you are not going to use force against them, and that there is a mechanism for security. I've just said at the beginning, Johnson, that there's still, with all our rhetoric, there's still 30 countries sitting comfortably under a nuclear umbrella, and other people feel, that they are a bit sitting in the fresh air, and we need to, find a solution to this dilemma, that we need a system of security that is comprehensive, inclusive, equitable. Other than that, we will continue to see this periodic temptation for country to develop nuclear weapons.
Just in closing, this is another strong theme of yours, the need for an alternative or a new security system to reassure countries so they won't try to get nuclear weapons. Could you just say a few words about what some of the elements of such a system might be in closing?
Well, I think some of the elements of that we need to provide some system of security to all countries. We need to have a strong Security Council that can provide this system of collective security, protect countries against attack, against aggression. That it's also maybe use the Security Council as a custodian of a very, very small arsenal of nuclear weapons to be used jointly, in case of a possible cheat. So we obviously worry about a possible cheat if we go to a zero nuclear disarmament. So, but we can probably use the Security Council both for conflict prevention and to deter aggression, and ultimately to be able to deal with a possible cheat. So
maybe the Security Council should become one of these virtual weapon possessors.
It could be, at least for a while, but ultimately I think we need to send the message to the people that we, let us focus on our understanding that we are one human family, that really we are not, our fight should not be about borders, about ethnicity, about religion, because we have reached through globalization a stage of human development that we know that either we are going to survive together and prosper together, or we are going to sink together. And that, I think, we need to continue to speak up on these issues. But I urge, and I'm here at Yale, that there's a lot work cut for academia. There's a lot of work cut for political scientists, nuclear physicists. That let's not just talk about we don't like what we see, nuclear, arms reliance on nuclear weapons. We really need to work on an alternative system of security, engineering the Security Council, developing a different security posture. There's a lot of work that we need to do, and it might take time. It is difficult. It is complex, but I think the time to start is now, because what we have today is an absolutely unacceptable situation.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to talk.
It has been a great pleasure to be with you, Jonathan. Thank you very much.